50 years separate the original Simon and Garfunkel song from disturbed heavy metal version, but The Sound of Silence is a timeless song, a tune that expresses a feeling so beautifully that it will always be current. But do you know what it means, how it was composed, or if Simon and Garfunkel like the new version? This is the story behind The Sound of Silence.
Welcome to Tremble Podcast, the place for music stories that thrill.
There are melodies that live with you, don't you think? For me, from time to time, this one comes to mind.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
It's the phrase that starts The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel. As soon as that melody comes to my mind, I have to look for the song immediately and play it several times for a few days. Then it goes away, I half forget it, and the process starts all over again a while later. The song is from 1964, composed by Paul Simon in his bathroom. Yes, just like that. I'll tell you about it shortly. It reached #1 in the USA in 1966. At that time, I wasn't born yet, and I couldn't tell you when I heard it for the first time. But when I did, I loved it, even though I didn't know what it was about. From the tone and melody, I could tell it was talking about something important. It surely had a message. I got the idea that being titled The Sound of Silence, it would say something about how we talk too much without thinking, or that we shout too much. As if Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel were asking us to be quiet, to be more silent, and to reflect. But I was wrong. The song doesn't talk about that. I'll tell you about it in a moment too. The thing is that almost 50 years after the release of the original song, in 2015, the heavy metal band Disturbed made a version of The Sound of Silence that went viral. To be honest with you, the first time I heard it, I didn't pay much attention to it, but a few years later, by chance, I heard it again, and I was hooked. The aggressive and angry voice of the singer, David Draiman, gave the song a new dimension. And not only that, but it opened the door for another generation, decades later, to discover the sound of silence and its precious message. The story behind The Sound of Silence. Simon and Garfunkel was an American folk duo that became very popular in the 1960s. They met in school and put together a group called Tom and Jerry without much success. A few years later, wisely, they decided to change their name as a band, using their surnames. That's how Paul Simon and Arthur Garfunkel released their first album in 1963, Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. That record contained an acoustic version of The Sound of Silence, with almost no instrumentation.
In restless dreams I walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone.
Do you know how much they sold? Only 2,000 copies, the typical friends and family. It went so bad that they split up. Paul Simon went to England and Art Garfunkel went back to college. At that time, it was common for music producers to take existing songs, add instruments or vocals, and re-release them as new, what is commonly known as a remix. It turns out that a well-known producer named Tom Wilson, who worked with Bob Dylan among others, was one day listening to the famous song by the Byrds, Turn, Turn.
To everything, turn, turn.
Hearing its strong echo and rock instrumentation, he thought it would be a perfect addition to the acoustic version of The Sound of Silence. He added guitar, bass, and drums, and since the tempo of the original recording was irregular, he used a strong echo for the mix. Once ready, he distributed it to college rock stations. It started to do well, so later in September 1965, it was released as a commercial single. You know what happened then? It became a hit. So much so that Paul Simon returned to the United States, teamed up again with Art Garfunkel, and their career grew and grew without stopping. On time, they would release other legendary songs, such as Bridge Over Troubled Water,
Like a bridge over troubled water.
or Mrs. Robinson from The Graduate.
Unless you please, Mrs. Robinson.
During their career, Simon and Garfunkel had many disagreements, which ended with their breakup in 1970, although later they have joined on many occasions for tributes and concerts, as the historical one in Central Park in 1981. From the 60s, we move in time 5 decades to 2015. That year, an important American heavy metal band called Disturbed, after a long period apart, came together again to make an album called Immortalized. The band had the habit of including in each album a cover of a song from another era and genre. They were considering several possibilities for that new album when the guitarist Mike proposed the rest of the members to make cover version of The Sound of Silence. The band's singer, David Draiman, said that at first the idea was as exciting as it was intimidating. To cover a classic of that magnitude was a huge responsibility. Not only that, but they wanted to make an arrangement that respected the purity of the song, which made the challenge even more complicated. They went for it, added piano, strings, and orchestration, achieving an epic sound. Regarding the voice, they gave it a more serious tone. Even angry, David's singing sounded very deep. With those variations, they published their modern version of The Sound of Silence in 2015. At the beginning, it didn't have much repercussion either, until they were invited to sing on Conan O'Brien's late-night TV show.
From NBC Studios in New York, it's Late Night with Conan O'Brien.
That performance went viral, reaching more than 800 million views on YouTube, catapulting the song to number 1 on the US charts. Thus, 50 years later, The Sound of Silence connected with a whole new generation. By the way, the version sounds like this.
Whisper in the sound.
What does The Sound of Silence mean? Paul Simon was 21 years old. He was still living at his parents' house. He had the strange habit of going into the bathroom in the dark to compose. It was 1962, before the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. You may wonder why I mention that fact. I do so because many theories say that The Sound of Silence expresses the feeling of the American people when the President of the United States, John Kennedy, was shot. But it is not so, because the assassination took place in 1963 and Paul Simon composed the song in 1962. What Paul himself has stated in an interview is that he used to compose with his guitar in the bathroom, with the light off and the water running in the sink, because that sound relaxed him. The first and most legendary phrase of The Sound of Silence, "Hello darkness, my old friend," represents that scene of Paul returning to his bathroom, turning off the light and starting to play. The truth is that Simon was young, a college student, but with a very special sensitivity. As he himself tells in his autobiographical book, Paul Simon, A Life, The Sound of Silence talks about the inability of people to communicate with each other, not intentionally, but emotionally, so that, he says, you see around people who are not able to love others. Almost all the songs of the duo Simon and Garfunkel are folk ballads, songs that could be labeled as singles. But this is something completely on purpose. Look at what Paul says. "I think in songs it's not just what the lyrics say, it's what the melody says and what the sound says. My thought is that if you don't have the right melody, it doesn't really matter what you have to say, people don't listen to it. They're only available to listen when the sound comes in and makes people open to the thought." That's the key to The Sound of Silence, the simplicity of the melody and the lyrics. It's a lyric written by a young guy. It's not about sophisticated thinking. In fact, many of the phrases were inspired by college reading material. Nor is it something that Paul Simon himself was experiencing on a deep level, although it is true that he had the feeling that in those days, the 60s, no one was listening to anyone. And it's also true that Simon was going through a period of post-adolescent angst. What is certain is that the song resonated with millions of people, largely because it had a simple, singable melody. With the modern heavy version of Disturbed, the case is different. We are talking about a darker and more resounding character, much more serious. The singer was already over 40 when they published the song and had a more extensive personal background, not to mention that logically he knew the importance of the song and how much The Sound of Silence means to the public. What are the best parts of The Sound of Silence? In the original version of Simon and Garfunkel, there are 3 parts to highlight. The beginning, when Paul sings, "Hello darkness, my old friend," it's warm, beautiful and subtle.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
When they sing, 10,000 people, maybe more, no one dared disturb the sound of silence. The image makes the hair on the back of your neck stand on end, doesn't it?
10,000 people, maybe more.
The last verse is so powerful. People bowed and prayed to the neon god they made.
And the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made.
In Disturbed's version, there are also 3 unforgettable parts. The song has the same beginning, but with a deeper tone, echoed and accompanied by piano.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
As David Draiman sings the word without, without speaking, without listening, it totally sounds like a silent scream.
People talking without speaking.
The final scream as he sings "In the Sounds of Silence" is spectacular, finishing with a beautiful instrumental too. Do Simon and Garfunkel like the version of Disturbed? The answer is yes, they do.
Yahoo!
Paul Simon has never hidden the fact that he likes Disturbed version. In fact, he wrote a Facebook post praising it and recommending buying their album. Furthermore, David Draiman, the lead singer of Disturbed, revealed that Paul Simon sent him an email congratulating him for his TV performance on The Conan O'Brien Show, to which David replied that it was an unimaginable honor to receive such praise from one of the greatest songwriters of all time, and that he just wanted to pay tribute to him. David and Paul met once in Maui, and they chatted for half an hour. There, Paul thanked him again for updating The Sound of Silence for the new generations. Whether it is the original version or the new one, what is certain is that The Sound of Silence is one of the best songs in history, and that it also proves that many times, less is more.
We hope you enjoyed the video and support us by subscribing to our channel or giving us a super thanks. With your support, we will carry on bringing you the best music stories.
Thank you very much, Trembles. We love you.